Welcome, everyone. Today, we're discussing an innovation that could transform how we detect cancer. EpiOne is developing a DNA-based technology for early cancer detection, specifically focusing on methods that could significantly improve screening accuracy and accessibility. The company has achieved remarkable milestones: clinical validation for its first cancer type with its first patent issued, successful validation of their technology across multiple cancer types. They moved into a biotech accelerator recently at SUNY. They are accelerating their commercialization schedule by fast-tracking a CLIA lab planned for next year. And they have built a world-class scientific advisory board. And personally, I'm startled by the rise of early onset cancer. And I strongly believe that early detection is crucial to better outcomes. But before I begin, I want to mention that EpiRaise's Start Engine raise closes on December 4th. And I'm going to add that link in the chat for anyone who's ready to invest. And a couple quick housekeeping reminders before we really get into the topic. So we'll be inviting you to ask your questions here today. And there's a Q&A button down below. So don't use the chat button, use the Q&A button, and we'll be interacting that way. So keep them coming. But keep in mind also that we're somewhat limited in what we can talk about based on SEC regulations. So we can't talk about deal terms or forward-looking statements or share price. So all those details are available at Start Engine. And if you have any questions that we don't get to today, you could always ask them in the discussion section there. Last note, as a pre-revenue company, any investment involves risk. So with that said, today we have two distinguished speakers sharing their insights. Michael Marquardt, CEO of EpiOne, brings extensive experience in healthcare leadership, including serving as the board chair of the American Cancer Society and co-founder and longtime CEO of the global medical second opinion provider, MediGuide. His personal connection to cancer, he'll talk about it later, but it really drives EpiOne's mission and to improve early detection for cancer, right? We are also joined by Daniel, and I'll have him talk about himself here just in a sec. He's one of our lead investors and board member of EpiOne. He's a very successful healthcare executive and entrepreneur with an impressive track record of scaling and exiting companies. So his expertise is backed by degrees from Yale and Harvard Business School. So Daniel, tell us, how did you assess the investment opportunity in EpiOne?
Sure. So when I look at any investment, it has to answer several things for me. Number one, what's the problem that it's solving? Is it a big enough problem? Are people aware of it? Number two, what's the TAM? Or in other words, what's the total addressable market? So does it have the opportunity to grow to be a multi-million-dollar company with a significant reward opportunity on the back end? And I think equally importantly for me, does it resonate personally? And so when I looked at EpiOne, it was one of those rare opportunities that checked multiple boxes. What problem is it solving? Early cancer detection. I think all of us probably know someone or either family member, colleague, friend that has been touched by cancer in some capacity. Number two, it is a multi-billion-dollar opportunity with no clearly and truly effective ways to diagnose or detect as early as could be beneficial. And then number three, I've had several family members touched by cancer, several who have passed away. My father has leukemia, so it's something that resonated with me personally. And if I could be involved financially with a company that could address these things and make a difference in people's lives, including those of my own family members, it was a no-brainer. So, and it's really rare as an entrepreneur, as someone who is an investor as well, someone who has experience in the healthcare space, in my case, mostly on the behavioral side, it's very rare to find opportunities that fulfill those multiple criteria and are something that that I can be passionate about.
Oh, all right. So, hey, I meant to say, right? Michael brought you in. You brought Michael into this, right? And I mean, you asked him for his opinion.
Correct, and thank you for prompting me on that. Once I identified the opportunity, or I would say the opportunity sort of came across my radar screen, one of the things that's important to me is to be able to assess, does it have legs? And in my case, not coming from a background in oncology or having an expertise, being able to turn to individuals that do to help me evaluate, does this make sense? And in Michael's case, and knowing him for decades and being one of my closest friends, it was a logical call to reach out to him and say, hey, Michael, does this make sense to you? And with his experience on the board of the American Cancer Society and obviously his personal connection to the space as well, he was the right person to reach out to. And as we began talking about it, as he began looking deeper into it, it became very clear that this was sort of the diamond in the rough. This was a true opportunity. And this may date me, but I remember an old commercial. I think it was Remington Shavers, where the CEO appears and said, "I like the product so much, I bought the company." And I think there's no better, I guess, example of or validation than from my colleague Michael to drop everything he was doing and come join the company as the CEO. And I think his willingness to do that for me spoke volumes and really made it an opportunity that not only I could get my arms around and believe in, but very much putting his money where his mouth is, becoming involved directly. And for me, again, seeking that validation, that was crystal clear that this was a real opportunity, that he was willing to put his time, commitment, and energy behind it, and his leadership, which I value. And as part of that, and as an entrepreneur myself, so much of it, a success of the company is the idea, but also the ability to execute, and can the management team deliver? And having Michael at the helm and becoming the CEO also was a reason for me to join the board as well, because I believe in the concept, but I also believe that through Michael and his colleagues, we have the management team that's in place that can actually execute on the idea in addition.
That's right. So many investors emphasize the strength of the team when they're making their decisions. So, Michael, tell us a
Critical.
little bit about how you got to where you are today.
Sure. I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, were you asking me, Abby? Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
Sorry.
Michael.
No, and thank you, Daniel, for being here, and thank you, Abby, for kicking us off. Cancer detection is something that is so important in a sense. When you think about it, there are more than 200 diseases that we call cancer, and almost all of them are curable if the cancer is detected early enough. And as I've said many, many times, from personal experience and from experience with loved ones or even colleagues, when you're hearing that somebody's been diagnosed with cancer, one of the only things you want to hear after that is then hear them say, "But we caught it early." And there are lots of limitations in cancer screening today. The most cancer screening that people know about are mammography, colonoscopies, PSA tests. I think people would be surprised to know how imprecise and inaccurate, sadly, and how many limitations those tests have. And so when I first took a look at what EPI-1 and what Dr. Fong and Dr. Yang and our scientific team have come up with, I have to say, be perfectly honest, it looked too good to be true. And I'm German originally. I grew up in Berlin. I do have a science background. I've studied analytical biochemistry, and I sort of looked at it and said, okay, I want to see the data. and it wasn't until I saw the data that I became a believer in what EPI-1 can do. And as you sort of go along this journey, Abby, I see large diagnostic companies with thousands of PhDs, and you sort of think, wow, how could we ever compete with that? And but science is one of these areas, and perhaps the only area of sort of the society left where if you have something unique and special, you can build a company on that, even if you're just a small group of people with not yet unlimited funding. And I'm just so excited about the technology that is underlying what EPI-1 is capable of, the market opportunity, the unmet needs, and also, you know, and now I'm getting going here. I would say that we're in the United States. Obviously, I think most everybody who's watching, although I know not everyone, is in the United States. We've had quite a bit of interest from investors in Europe and in Asia. There are about 8 billion people on this planet. All of them have a risk to get cancer. There are only about 300 million plus in the United States. There are a lot of there's a lack of conventional testing in much of Asia, except in the really richest and wealthiest parts of Asia. And so I think really the opportunity here is huge.
And so how would you say that EPI-1's approach differs from the competitors? I mean, obviously it's quite different to do a blood test than a colonoscopy. One seems far less invasive. That's the blood test. But what are the real, I mean, there are other closer competitors too, right?
Absolutely, and I would say that the way I explained it to a friend of mine just in the last few days is that we seem to be at a tipping point with regards to early cancer detection and sort of the way the whole field is evolving. And this actually dates back a couple of decades with the Human Genome Project, which many of those listening may remember. It was at the time, you know, said this was during the time that President Bill Clinton was in the White House. There was billions of dollars spent on sequencing the human genome, and the thinking was, boy, this could lead to a lot of discoveries in the future. And we're just sort of at this tipping point now where that's starting to happen. And there are a number of scientific efforts and companies that are in the field that have made a big difference and are getting us beyond just sort of the imaging testing, you know, X-rays, MRIs, CAT scans, and all the way to whole genome sequencing, you know, companies like Grail that are doing outstanding work. And but there is a area sort of in between that is, I would say, there's an opening for accurate and affordable early cancer detection. I sometimes have joked with colleagues that when you're talking about accurate and affordable early cancer detection, up to now it's been pick any two. You can't have all three. If it's, you know, accurate and truly early, then it's not affordable. If it's affordable, it may not be accurate. And so the niche here, you really, how does EPI-1's approach differ? It is based on an entirely novel epigenetic science. That's where the name comes from. Some people have asked me, you know, why is the company called EPI-1? It is because it is based on epigenetics discoveries. And epigenetics, if you put it into Google or ChatGPT, you'll find out it relates to the expression of the genomic code and how cells are expressed. Without getting too into the science, when you think about the DNA helix that's in every single cell, and it's a DNA molecule, it's really the ultimate basis of human life. It still makes all kinds of different cells. It makes kidney cells, and it makes, you know, it makes skin cells, and it makes you know, liver cells and so forth. And so we're really just at this tipping point, in my opinion, of really understanding what makes cell growth duplicate out of control. And what EPI-1 and Dr. Fong and Dr. Yang discovered several years ago is that there is a part of the genome that changes when a cell turns cancerous. And the way I've explained it to my friends that are not scientists is that if you think about it, it's a little bit like, you know, if you have a radio and you're dialing on, and there's no signal, there's no sound anywhere, and there's no signal anywhere, and then you're dialing in just the right frequency, and all of a sudden you're getting beautiful music or a radio broadcast. And but if you look just a little bit further on the dial and there's nothing, and it's sort of knowing where to look or knowing how to tune the receiver, if you will, might be a good analogy of and EPI-1. What's different is that we know where to look on the genome to see if a cell has turned cancerous, and if that means that based on a blood test or based on a tissue-based test, or maybe someday in the future based on a urine test, you're able to discover either fast-moving, highly aggressive prostate cancer or early stages of other cancers, that will allow for treatment that is not possible once the cancer has progressed further.
Thank you, Michael. I think that's a really apt analogy and it helps me understand it better. Did you want to go any deeper into the technology? I know it is kind of a frequently asked question. To me, the third-party validation component of it is really stands out into, helping me have confidence in it. But maybe, is there anything else you'd like to say about the technology?
I think the key thing, Abby, to know for everyone who's taking a close look and considering investing in EP1 is after the initial discovery, what have we done to validate that we really have something here? And we've done a lot to validate this. We've validated in the lab. You mentioned our State University of New York, SUNY Biotechnology Incubator, where we've been located, and we upgraded into a much larger lab, in part with funding that we received through Start Engine over the last 6 months. And what we've done is that we've literally taken randomly collected samples, blood samples and tissue samples, and have validated our results in the 95, 96, 97, 93 percentile. And that is highly unusual. Now, what I will say, and maybe caution everyone, is that because we're a small, still entrepreneurial company, we've not done this with tens of thousands of samples yet. We've done it with a small number of samples. We're less than 500. But the results have been outstanding. And so, and the advantages of our current methods, the low cost of a test, it really all lends itself to an annual screening ultimately, or to a screening of a high-risk population, or somebody who may be in a remission from a disease and is worried about the recurrence. And there are lots of different avenues to go here. We're just at the beginning of this journey.
Well, Daniel, I'd like to bring you back in and ask you to talk a little bit about the market timing and opportunity, kind of building on what Michael was saying.
Sure. One of the things that from an investor perspective that I always look at is what is the current understanding of the market today, and in this case of cancer diagnostics. And one doesn't necessarily want to be the first to market where you actually have to create one. And I've done that in other companies, and it's often a very heavy lift. What's interesting to me about this is that you have companies that are doing this already. You have products on the market that are available to consumers. So we don't have to go through an education process of the market as to why this is needed or what we're doing. But I think Michael nicely articulated the differentiator to be able to come in with something that is low cost, that's highly accurate, that we can deploy very quickly, and from the technology perspective, to be able to essentially leapfrog existing competitors. That's incredibly compelling. And it's almost, in my background of healthcare, but also technology, it's analogous to coming up with a better product, but a better product that's far superior than what exists in the marketplace. And when you're talking about saving lives and the kind of impact that this can have, that drives rapid adoption. That's where you can come up with a game changer. And also thinking about it from an opportunity perspective, is this something that's a domestic opportunity? Is this something that's an international opportunity? And what was interesting to me is the high level of awareness and market maturity in the United States. That allows for rapid adoption and rapid deployment. But then you have this whole tremendous opportunity on a global scale in locations where you don't have the technology, you don't have the funding, you don't have the scalability for some of the traditional methods that exist today. So that creates an incredibly compelling opportunity to be able to go into those markets with, again, a low cost, highly efficient, highly effective product that can be deployed universally. And so, when we think about my earlier comment on a TAM, what's the total addressable market? for me, this was really, really compelling, really, really interesting, in that you can deploy domestically, you can deploy internationally. And so the products we're developing, it's a strategic decision as to where to go first, but the opportunity is there. And we're not limited in terms of geography. And so if we see an opportunity in Asia, if we see an opportunity in Europe, these things can be deployed rapidly and revenue can be generated relatively quickly. And that's unusual in business opportunities today.
Michael, could you tell us a little bit more about routes to market and the role that the CLIA lab plays in that?
Absolutely, and that is actually one of the things that I think is particularly compelling. As I've looked at different biotech opportunities from an investment perspective over the years, one of the things that I've always struggled with as an investor, frankly, is that oftentimes the road to market entry can be very long. I mean, justifiably, but you look at something and then it's a really good presentation, and then you hear, well, and if everything goes well, in 5 years we will enter the market, and that's usually a downer. People sort of say, wow, I mean that's and it depends on a lot of different things that have to happen. And one of the things that particularly attracted me to Epi1 is the fact that we can start entering the market with what's known as a laboratory developed test, an LDT, a laboratory developed test. And essentially the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, considers an LDT, it essentially considers it for regulatory purposes a medical device. And even though there's no device necessarily involved, but what that means, Abby, is that you have to operate out of essentially a federally approved and certified lab. It's called a CLIA lab, CLIA. If anyone wants to Google it, it stands for Continuous Lab Improvement Amendments. And it's basically, the FDA sort of looks at this and say, well, first of all, diagnostic tests are different than therapeutics. When you're thinking about therapeutics, you're injecting a compound into a patient, or you're giving them a tablet, and you wonder, oh my God, what happens if there's a safety risk? What happens if there's an unintended side effect? Typically, there are very long trials, clinical trials. I'm sure many of those listening have heard about the clinical trial process. And there are basic safety trials first. In a diagnostic environment, you can certainly do harm, if you will, if you have a test that is just wholly inaccurate. It will do harm in the sense that it may cause emotional harm, tell somebody that they have cancer when they don't, or things like that. But the threshold is a little different. And so what the FDA and the federal government decided long ago, and this is mirrored by other countries' regulatory environments, is that as long as you are operating out of a laboratory that is that meets certain criteria, and they're very stringent criteria and very professional criteria, including having a certified lab director, then you're able to enter the market and basically in a capitalist society, if you will, sort of the best test wins, if you will. And so our road to market is we're planning on opening a CLIA certified lab next year in 2025. And we're planning on immediately upon opening that lab and having certification to start offering a first suite of tests. And this will be sort of, I would say, our first foot in the market in terms of being able to sell and market. Simultaneously with that, Abby, we're also planning on starting the process to seek FDA approval, which is a multi-year process for a mass-produced test. This is something that can be shipped. It can be shipped to a physician office. It can be shipped to a clinic. It can be scaled overseas. But that is something that is sort of the next step in the evolution of the company. So at this point, we're very much focused on the go-to-market strategy. We plan to work with providers directly, physician offices, oncology, specialists, hospitals, other lab companies, We're also planning on actually partnering with some life insurance companies. The underwriting process for life insurance, could very much benefit from the type of work that EPI1 does and the kind of products that we plan on selling. And then again, long term, the plan is to scale this up via a mass-produced test. And by the way, that is something that a lot of the competitors that we've mentioned out there, again, which we're all cheering on because I feel like it's great for there to be other players in the market. Many of them do not lend themselves to a mass production effort or to that kind of scalability because they're relying on supercomputing to actually do genomic sequencing, which will never happen in a physician office, or at least not in the next 20, 25 years, I would say. So that I think is one of the things that makes MediGuide stand out. I mean, it makes, excuse me, EPI1 stand out. And I'm thinking about one of my earlier companies that I ran. And so I think that really that's what's
You had a successful exit from that company. Is that right, Michael?
yes.
What does
Yeah.
that mean exactly? Like was it acquired by a big, like, I actually don't know.
Yes, no, I mean, and Daniel actually is familiar with some of the details. It's a bit of a long story. I don't want to take us on a
Okay.
tangent, but basically, everyone who invested early in the company did very well when the company was sold. And yeah, I mean, this maybe one way to put it. This is not my first rodeo. It's not Daniel's first rodeo. And I mean, it took a lot for me to decide to take this on. And I have to say, I was catching up with a friend of mine just over the weekend, and he said to me, Michael, I haven't seen you this excited in like more than 10 years or so. And I said, well, that's how I feel. I think we really have a tiger by the tail here. This is a very exciting opportunity for me and for everyone who has joined us. I'm thrilled that we've had over 300 investors join us here over the last few months. And we are coming, we'll talk about this later, I know, but we are coming to the end of this process. And so I'm excited. We're planning on doing one more webinar after this one in a couple of weeks. And but it's really I think it's an incredible opportunity.
Well, we have our first question that's come in. And so I just want to remind everyone who's here right now that you have a chance to ask questions to these two right now. In fact, here's our first one. And I'd also like to add to this in asking, what types of cancer are you currently approved for? And then the question that's here is, how have EPI1 tests performed in identifying cancer at various stages of cancer? So 1, 2, 3, 4.
Great question. So we started, and this was in part, I would say it's driven by two important factors. We started with prostate cancer. The reason number one why we did is there was a availability of samples, I mean tissue samples, for us to work with. And also number two, it's actually quite a challenge, and we're sort of looking for a challenge. If you think about it, a lot of what goes on here, again, without getting too into the weeds, is you're looking for that signal, as I said earlier, that signal that early cancer cells are giving off. In the scientific world, that is referred to as circulating tumor DNA. So especially in a liquid biopsy, you have circulating tumor DNA. And so the prostate gland is tiny, and so it's a much harder challenge than say liver cancer or lung cancer, which is much larger organ. And so we started with prostate cancer in part because we're looking for a challenge, but also because we had access to prostate cancer samples, tissue samples, and for the early clinical validation. We have since also done work on 6 other cancer types, including stomach cancer, pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, several others, and we are also working on what is called a pan-cancer test, which would be one test that finds multiple cancer types all at the same time, all in one shot, basically, and that is, in some ways, almost like a holy grail, because you're able to detect and diagnose correctly the subtype of the cancer all in one go. And so I think that addresses the question I was asked. This is not just a binary test where you sort of say, okay, the person has cancer or don't have cancer. This goes much further than that. It goes into the ability of understanding the aggressiveness of a tumor. There's this different staging for cancers. In prostate cancer, you have the Gleason score, you have things like that, and we go, really because we're talking about a test that happens at the molecular level, as opposed to a pathology staining level where you're just sort of doing a visual inspection of the cells. You're talking about something that happens at the molecular level, so you have a much more finely tuned way of diagnosing. I really think, one way that, and we talked about this at a board meeting recently, it's a little bit like comparing an iPhone 15 Pro with a flip phone. And so and again, there are other companies that are doing this, and they're also investing a lot of money in it. But it's which has helped with education. But it really is that's really, I would say, the key difference is that we're working at the molecular level.
So you'd say that you could go beyond just saying stage 1, 2, 3, 4. You could give a lot more of fine detail about what the cancer is.
Absolutely, and prognosis, disease progression, as well as potential effectiveness of different medications.
Does sound like the Holy Grail. Imagine that, one simple test and you'd know any kind of cancer. Can you tell us a little bit about your IP strategy?
Sure. We have been working with what I believe is one of the most respected law firms in the world for intellectual property. It's called Wilson Sonsini, Goodrich and Rosati. They're based. We're working with the team in San Francisco, and when they first took a look at what we have, really took a look at our discovery, they counseled us to keep the actual discovery as a trade secret, somewhat similar to the Coca-Cola Coke formula. Put it in a safe, and then build a patent moat around it. And that's the strategy that we have been executing on. And the first patent that we filed and the first patent that we received was for an application of our discovery in the context of diagnosing and detecting prostate cancer. We're in the process of filing several additional patents, and we hope to have 2 more filed by the end of the year. And so I am not a patent attorney, but what we've been advised to do is to be very vigilant about protecting the IP that essentially surrounds the core discovery, while keeping the core discovery as a closely guarded trade secret, and that's the way that we're executing.
Very good. And I saw you've got 1 patent
that is issued. Yes.
Completely issued.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And several more in the works.
Yep.
Very good. I see a question here about paths to liquidity and how, but I don't know that we'll be able to answer it here. If you don't mind, Mario, just go ahead and add your question over on the Start Engine discussion section. I think that we'd be more able to answer your question there. It's a valid one, but we can't talk about certain things. So anyway, keep them coming. Appreciate the questions. Yeah, no, Mike, sorry. I do have another one here. It's about competitive differentiation, right? And so it's a question about, we've got 2 here. One is, how do you compare to other liquid biopsy companies in this space? And it says, how do you compare to the Galleri test? If I'm saying that right.
The Galleri test.
Galleri.
Let me take that briefly. As I've said, a lot of development was kicked off by the Human Genome Project. If you were really tying it back to sort of the scientific underpinnings, and the Galleri test is a test that has been developed by Grail. Grail is a company that I followed for years. They've been in the news quite a bit recently, and their scientific approach is very different than ours because they have to essentially do a whole genomic sequencing project out of every single liquid biopsy that they receive. It's a little bit like 23andMe for cancer screening. And I wish that they were further along, frankly. And there's been a lot of publicity for the company, not all positive, sadly. But I think overall they're moving in the right direction. The EPI-1 discovery is based on very different science, so it's a little bit like apples and oranges, perhaps. EPI-1 is looking at actual genomic changes that are happening when cells turn cancerous, and they're not based on on having to sequence thousands of different parts of the genome in a huge effort that costs a lot of money. So they're very different. One of the things that you'll notice immediately in the difference is that the Gallery test and really all other liquid biopsy tests that are out there, once the blood sample's been received by the company, it takes them quite a bit of time before they can produce results because there's a lot of work involved. Our test, I've seen it done, literally can be done in a lab in an afternoon. It can be done in a few hours. Now, that is not always critical, but oftentimes it is. There certainly are cases where the physicians are standing by or the family standing by wanting to learn more, and having to wait 3 weeks is not necessarily ideal. So I would say that again, it's very different science. Our company is based on a discovery, by Dr. Fong, that is truly novel in relying on changes that are happening at the epigenetic level in areas of the DNA molecule that have not received a lot of attention in the scientific community.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Daniel, I'd like to bring you back in here for this next question. Let's see. Well, earlier you were telling me that something that really intrigued you about this was the unmet needs component and the market opportunity. So as we're scaling into international, as EPI-1's scaling into international territories, do you have any insights that you might share about partnerships or the pathways there?
Sure. And actually, I may let Michael address that, because I think from a company strategy perspective and also real opportunities on the ground that he's been driving, I think let me defer to him on that one. I have some thoughts, but I'd rather he hit that one on.
Sure. And so let's go into that for a little bit. I have spent the better part of the last 2.5 decades also doing work in Asia and in Europe, and I've seen firsthand what the healthcare environment looks like in that part of the world. And I believe there's a tremendous market opportunity for a US-based, highly respected scientific effort that will provide accurate and affordable early cancer detection, because we will be leapfrogging what is currently available in the market. Now, that said, there's a lot of business here in the United States, and we are focusing on that first. But just by virtue of the fact that I've gotten involved in this and became the CEO in 2023, I've been contacted by a lot of folks in my network, including senior healthcare executives around the world that are interested in partnering with EPI-1 at the right time, and we're going to closely evaluate that. When you're sitting on something that truly is groundbreaking, I think the more people find out about it, the more interest there will be. So we don't have infinite resources at this point, so we're doing our best to stay focused and to really make sure we can execute first in the United States before we scale the business internationally. But the mere fact that our business lends itself to international scalability, of course, is very exciting to me. I know it's very exciting to Daniel and to other investors, because the United States overall, it's not only Americans or people that live in the United States that get cancer. It's a global problem. It's the second largest cause of death in the world. And if we can make a dent, a major dent, by helping people and helping physicians diagnose cancer much earlier, it'll make a big difference.
I want to make sure everybody has a chance to ask any question that they might have. So you can drop it in the Q&A section right now. I've got one more that's queued up. So now is your time before we wrap things up. You can get your questions in. Oh, here's a new one. Can you discuss the difference between sensitivity and specificity in this type of testing and how EPI-1's novel technology performs in these measures in early versus late stage cancer?
Sure. So sensitivity is defined as essentially find if there's cancer present, what are the chances that you're finding it? And in tissue sample testing, we have performed at 94, 95, 96%, 93% in sensitivity routinely. As an example, the PSA test, which most people have heard about for prostate-specific antigen, routinely performs in the 60s, and it's become the standard of tests that a lot of men get, even with sensitivity that's only in the mid 60s. Specificity is sort of, think of it as the reverse. What is the likelihood, if there is no cancer present, that the test correctly finds that there is no cancer present? Again, we're performing routinely in the 90s, 92, 94, 95. And so if you're looking at, what does that really mean? Sensitivity, if you have a high percentage of sensitivity, it means that you will have very few, like maybe 2 or 3% of false negatives, where a patient is told, no, you don't have cancer, but in fact they do, which of course is horrible. The whole point of testing is to make sure that you find the cancer early. Specificity is sort of the opposite, and it might, is also horrible, where you're told that you have cancer, but you actually don't. Especially the PSA test is known to really put a lot of families and on edge when the number goes up and people are wondering, okay, now they're telling me to come back and be tested in a month, and everybody's on pins and needles. And the same, sadly, is true with a lot of imaging tests, because you're seeing things, and now it's like, okay, what is that? And so being able to do this testing at the molecular level, really makes all the difference. And I forget, what was the second part of that question, Abby?
Early versus late stage cancer.
Yes. So that's a great one. So prostate cancer is kind of an interesting case here. Prostate cancer tends to be fairly slow moving. I mean, not in all cases, but it tends to be a slow moving tumor. And so it has its own diagnostic challenges because of that. And there are cases, and I say this, by the way, my father is a urologist, and I grew up sort of surrounded in the urology community, and I learned about sort of people sometimes saying, well, this may be a prostate cancer, you don't have to worry about it. It's growing so slowly that you may not even want to do anything. They called it watchful waiting. Just sort of, it may not actually cause any real problems. But you also you have cases where there's a really aggressive prostate cancer, that and EPI-1 has the ability to, first of all, differentiate between the two, but also the sensitivity and the specificity goes up with highly aggressive cancers of all types, because you end up with more circulating tumor DNA. And so, we really have, and this is again something that is, somewhat unique to our platform, versus, others out there. So when you're looking at, even other cancers, won't rattle them all off. But when you have an aggressive tumor, or when you have something that's stage 3, that's stage 4, the sensitivity and specificity numbers actually go up significantly. So they may go up to 100%, or 99%. And again, that is something that is not necessarily the case with alternative ways of testing.
That's really interesting. And so we have another question here, and Richard said thank you. When can we buy the test in the US, and how much will it cost?
I'm hoping that we will be able to start offering our first test, and there will be a whole suite of tests that we will have available. But the first one we're planning on making available hopefully in the third or fourth quarter of next year. And we're hoping to keep it certainly under $1,000, perhaps even as low as $500, but in that range. And we do have a waiting list set up on our website. So if somebody goes to epi1.com, and I think you'll probably drop that in the
Yep. Mhm.
link. There's a way to sign up and be added to our waiting list, so that you'll be notified once tests available. That will just be the first set, because we're going to have ultimately probably hundreds of different tests. But we're frankly we're trying not to overpromise. We plan to make a first test available. It'll probably be a tissue-based test, and then later will become a blood, liquid biopsy-based test. So people, I'm asking them to be patient, because we're trying to, we're committed to doing this the right way, and to make available what we know is meeting all of the standards.
When I heard you talking about it earlier, I thought it was interesting, right? Because you kind of have two pathways that you're pursuing at the same time. One that's much faster to market, and then the broad one that everybody will just kind of be able to purchase, or physicians can purchase. But maybe you could tell a little bit more about what kind of partnerships actually get the test into people's hands in that first phase.
Well, and I think Daniel brought it up a little bit earlier. I think it all starts with education, and that's where we're being helped by the broader industry efforts. If you're the only company out there that's doing this sort of thing, I think it's very tough. It's a very tough environment. It sort of means you're perhaps too early, and I'm quite enjoying currently that there's it seems like every time you turn around, you hear about a new kind of test that is out there. There's been a lot of development in the scientific community in the last year, and we're right in the middle of it. I think that um, it's we're going to start by educating the physician and scientific community. We're planning on making a presentation at one of the largest cancer research conferences early in the spring, this coming spring, just to sort of start, I would say, putting ourselves out there a little bit, and then and we're going to also at the same time start having conversations with potential providers, with medical centers, with lab companies that are working routinely with LDT, laboratory developed test providers, and that's really when that will start. So we're right now, that this really still is an early opportunity to get involved with a company that is working, on a platform of very solid science, and is committed to taking it all the way into the market.
We have comment question here. And we're getting to the end of our live event today. So, okay, I believe that your technology is the most promising at the moment, is this comment, right? After the technology is proven on a global scale and is accepted, is it likely that the big players will want to buy your company? And then it's a kind of a question about exit strategy. I'm not sure how much we can talk about in terms of forward-looking statements, but it's fair to say, I don't know. So what do you think?
Yeah, I know we have to be a little bit careful with the rules, but I actually would love to bring Daniel back into this, just based perhaps on
Great.
his experience with this sort of thing. And so, Daniel, why don't you take a whack at it?
Sure, and to Michael's point, I've sold multiple companies, and as an entrepreneur, as a founder, and as an operator, my perspective has always been: you focus on the product, you focus on the go-to-market, you focus on growth, customer, etc. And if you do everything right, the opportunity will come to you. And I think, to Michael's earlier point, if you're best in class from a testing perspective, if your results are superior to the competition and what else is available on the market, hospitals are going to want to work with you. Labs are going to want to work with you. If you're a doctor who has a patient that has a potential diagnosis, which test do you want to use? You want to use the most accurate one. And if you're in a position that you're leapfrogging the competition, and certainly within this space with some very large companies that have invested significant amounts of money, if you don't want to lag behind, you have two choices: either develop a better product, which we will be way ahead, or acquire the best in class that's in the market. And so I think from a company's perspective, our focus will always be go to market, build our product, and to use the field of dreams analogy, if you build it, they will come. The exit opportunity will present itself at the right time.
Yeah, I agree with everything Daniel just said, and I will just add to that we're so I'm 54 years old. I'm looking at this as the capstone of my career, my professional career. I plan to take this all the way, if you will. We're not looking to quote unquote make a quick buck or something like that. This is too important. This is too serious. This is a very serious effort, and it is quite common in this industry that just like it is in the technology industry, for the large players, once they see a new emerging company, to take a look and to sort of see if they can somehow absorb them early. I will say that we will be quite reluctant to do that, because we believe we have a roadmap to take this company all the way, and I'm certainly a CEO and shareholder, completely committed to that, as I know it's the entire team.
One final question here before we wrap things up. How many people have been tested to EPI-1?
At this point, we have worked on clinical validation with about 330 samples altogether, and we're right now actually focused on expanding that quite significantly to well over 1,000, and then multiple thousands over the next year. But at this point, it's still a fairly small group, but it's a little bit like when you're looking at the results and you're seeing how strong they are, that is really what's given us the confidence to be able to go out and raise additional capital. It takes capital to start offering this and make it something that becomes commercially available.
So Daniel, I know the EPI-1's raise is coming to a close here on December 4th. It's very soon. So Daniel, I'd like for you to kind of talk about, as an early investor and a board member, what are you most excited about for EPI-1, and kind of a little bit about why did you get into this, and are you still happy that you're in?
Sure, no, absolutely. I think number one, I've run companies, I've built companies. I don't want to spend my time nor my capital on opportunities that I don't think will be game changers in the industry. Life is short and time is precious. And this one, to me, I think, to echo Michael's sentiment, is a game changer, hands down. And we have the opportunity to truly revolutionize cancer diagnosis. And to see that, to see the impact that we can have on the market, not only speaking with my wallet in terms of being an investor, but my time as well in terms of being a board member. And it's exciting for me to be a part of this company at an early stage, to bring expertise in the healthcare space, expertise in operations and in business, and also to work alongside Michael, who's a close friend, but also a highly experienced, highly successful executive who I know will take this company to an industry leading point. And so, I think the sky's the limit. And we talked a bit about the domestic opportunity. We talked about the international opportunity, but to impact, I don't even want to say millions of lives, but potentially billions of lives is incredibly exciting. And I want to be a part of this, hands down.
Okay, so you are happy that you got involved and that you're still here. That's great.
I love this company, and I'm so excited to see what the coming years will bring.
I definitely want to encourage everyone to, I see another questions come in. Take a close look at the website. Take a look at the Start Engine page. Um, it's a limited time opportunity. We will have one more webinar before the campaign closes on December 4th. So that's happening right before Thanksgiving. Michael?
Yes, November 26th at 4:30 Eastern Time, 1:30 Pacific, and 10:30 in the evening in Europe. We will have our final webinar for this. And as you said, Abby, we are not planning on extending this campaign. The Start Engine campaign is going to close at midnight Pacific time, between the night from the 4th of December into the 5th of December. And I will just say that if there are additional questions that folks have, you can ask questions on the Start Engine campaign page at any time, and we answer them right away. That way everybody can see the answers. I should also say that we're raising capital from the crowd to build a broad base of investors and to build real public excitement. We want to be inclusive. As Daniel said, this is a groundbreaking new company that we believe will change the lives of millions of people every year, and we want everyone to be a part of EPI1. So I hope that you will consider, if you're not already, and there are investors that are on, but become an investor in EPI1 today and help us transform cancer diagnosis around the world and to save lives. Thank you.